So hello and a big welcome back to the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. My name is Mitchell Jones. I'm the Outreach Editor at Resources Conservation and Recycling, and I'm your host for today. It's a pleasure to have everyone here with us. So this is the English language version of the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. We also have a Chinese language version of the program. So if you're potentially interested in that, you have some Chinese language skills, or maybe you're interested in the research that's going on in that part of the world, feel very free to check that out. The scope of the program is essentially matching that of the journal, and we aim to present or to incorporate a balanced program that addresses all elements of the scope equally. What that means is that you can expect to see webinars on all elements of the scope, a really broad range of topics. The one thing that we do ask is that our presenters give some attention to audience accessibility. We want the presentations to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And the way that we want to do that is by minimizing the use of jargon and field-specific terminology, and really giving some introductory notes on the topic prior to give people a little bit of an understanding of the research area before diving into the specific aspects of the study in question. Registration for the program is necessary. You can register either using the links that are circulated at the end of each month in the Resources Conservation Recycling newsletter, or the social media pages, X, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can also find those links on the Resources Conservation Recycling website, the journal homepage. Sorry, I have some allergies and the mucus is making me feel a bit sick. You can find those links also on the journal homepage, the Resources Conservation and Recycling journal homepage. The other point is that all of those links are also to the archived content of the program, which is all archived and live streamed to YouTube. You can also visit the YouTube page directly to get that content, youtube.com/@RCR journal. The final point is that we really appreciate your feedback. If you have any feedback on the program, compliments, criticism, ideas for improvement, you will receive a link to a survey at the end of the presentation today. It's only 8 questions. It won't take you more than a minute to solve to complete it, and we really do take that feedback seriously when we're trying to improve the program to make it better aligned with your research interests and what you expect from the program. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. So, a few notes, the event program for today. So we've had the welcome address. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the journal, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker. We're very lucky to have Lydia with us today. Thank you, Lydia, for being with us. Then we're going to have a few brief notes, housekeeping, a 20-minute presentation, some questions at the end, and then the closing remarks after the information for the next event. So hopefully everyone here is familiar with the journal, Resources Conservation and Recycling. I like to say that the clue for our research interest really lies in the name. If we're interested in everything resources, conservation, and recycling, specifically systems-wide strategies, technological, economic, institutional, and policy focus, resource management practices, conservation, recycling, and resource substitution, resource productivity improvement, restructuring of production and consumption profiles, and transformation of industry. So if you have any top-notch research in those areas, be sure to send it in our direction. Housekeeping for today, if we could have all communication please in English. This is just so that we have a bridging language that we can use to communicate where we're all going to understand each other. We have closed captions available and running currently for those that might be interested in them. So if English is perhaps not your first language and you might benefit from those subtitles, or if you prefer to watch your webinars without audio on the train or something like that and read, they are there for you if you would like to use them. Please also feel free to post any questions in the Q&A over the course of the presentation. We're more than happy to facilitate your questions or receive your questions via audio. If you prefer to speak directly with Lydia and ask your question, or perhaps there's some discussion points there, we are able to facilitate that. All you need to do is indicate you're interested in doing that using the raised hand reaction in your toolbar, and we'll be very pleased to welcome you onto the floor to speak to Lydia. So a big welcome and a big thank you to Lydia BALS from the University of Applied Science, Mainz in Germany, for being with us today. She's sharing with us her research on the enabling role of support flows in circular supply chain designs. Lydia BALS is Professor of Sustainable Procurement and Supply Chain Management at the University of Applied Sciences, Mainz, Germany, and affiliated with EBS Universität, Germany, and Copenhagen Business School, Denmark. Formerly, she was head of the Department Global Procurement Solutions at Bayer and project manager at Bayer In-House Consulting. She obtained her doctoral degree from EBS Universität and made research visits at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and at Columbia Business School, Columbia University in the United States. Her main research areas are sustainable supply chain management, offshoring, reshoring, and procurement organization. She teaches purchasing and supply management, operations logistics, and supply chain management courses. She is published in the Journal of Operations Management, Journal of Supply Chain Management, Journal of Purchasing and Supply Management, Journal of International Management, and other academic outlets. We are very pleased to welcome Lydia to the program. Thank you so much for being with us today, Lydia. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you're able to share yours.
Thanks a lot, Mitch, for this very kind invitation and also introduction. So going over to our presentation, I'm very happy to share an overview of the results that we published in your journal. And it is a joint work of author team that is shown here of Kelsey Taylor, Eugenia Rosca, Francesca Gioli, and myself. It is the result of a multi-year project where we have been studying B Corps, but I'm going to tell more about that in a second. So this is how the final paper looks like in the journal. We were very happy that it found a fantastic home at Resources Conservation and Recycling last year, and that we can reach a very broad audience and bridge also between the more, let's say, industrial engineering world and the supply chain management and operations worlds, which is a fantastic opportunity for us. And yeah, I'm glad to share an overview of the paper today. So going directly into the framework that is the foundation of this paper, we are building, or we build it on the theory of the supply chain, with the foundational publication being Carter et al. 2015 in the Journal of Supply Chain Management. And this, at the time, proposed that the material flows, of course, they are the central flows within a supply chain, but the support flows, so the information and financial flows, they are really critical to the success of the supply chain. So they do not involve the physical goods or the materials, but they enable the material supply chain. So that was what was published there. In later research, also, as we can see in other publications over the years, we kept working on the notion that actually it's the information flows and the financial flows that can help make supply chains more sustainable, going beyond just even just a simple facilitation of the primary material flows for production, but actually having a much wider role in the whole idea of getting sustainable supply chain designs. And if we look at the existing supply chain work, that is the final point here on the slide, this work mainly is still focused on material flows. And if we go to the topic of circular economy, on the reversing of material flows and, of course, closing the loop. So that's what we have here on the right, a depiction that we will use throughout the presentation to highlight what's also new in this research. So we have here on the right the closed loop view here in the vertical setup with the focal firm and the supplier and the customer side here on top and bottom. But if you look to the left of the figure, you have the open loop flows where we want to highlight that it's going beyond the supply chain, something that is very familiar in the, let's say, circularity literature, that it is across industries or across supply chains that we have to optimize flows. But nevertheless, this picture here with these full lines is always, the full lines in this presentation are always meaning material flows. And that's our ingoing proposition, that there's a lot on closed loop flows, there's a lot on open loop flows, but most of the literature focuses on the physical material flows. So that's why we put here at the bottom material flows previously known, to highlight that this is something that has been researched quite a lot. Now, going further from there, let me see. The research question we sought to address with this paper then became, how do financial and information support flows enable open and closed loop material flows to achieve circular supply chains? And in order to study this, we did empirical work. We looked at the B Lab, so it's certification of B Corp, the B Lab winners of the Best of the World awards, who won multiple awards, including at least one for environmental performance. We wanted multiple awards because we wanted to have some continuity, so that you can also assume it's not only environmentally and oftentimes also socially actually viable, the business model and accompanying supply chain they have, but also that there is a kind of financial viability involved. So here's a little statement that we also have in the paper, what environmental awards are looking for. In a nutshell, it's about very advanced approaches to an environmental supply chain. And our hypothesis at the time when we collected the data was that this implies that there's probably also circular economy elements already implemented in these very advanced firms, which we also found. So in the sampling, we had these almost 400 firms that were multiple awards winners. Then we invited 88 for interviews, and in this paper, there are 5 cases that are studied in depth, and of which we are showing here the findings. And we talked to these firms. We collected the data via semi-structured interviews as primary data, but there was also secondary data involved from the company websites, but also sometimes publications about them actually in the business press, or actually in one case even that there's a teaching case available about one of them. So who are our cases? The first one here shown on the left is Westpaw. It's a company, a B Corp in the United States that is, among other things, producing these toys for animals, and they have their own developed material, Zogoflex, which is easily recyclable, just as one area where they really care about environmental impact also of their products, and also the ability to actually get the materials back and create new products from it. Then we have Preserve, the United States, a company which, among other things, produces toothbrushes made from recovered ocean plastic. And the other 3 cases that we have are fashion firms coming from 3 different countries. So Better World Fashion from Denmark produces jackets and handbags made from secondary leather sources. I'm also going to show a slide with more details about that. So they really care about not only for the leather, but everything that is being put into their clothing and into the handbags to be from secondary material sources. Then we have Mud Jeans from the Netherlands, who care a lot also about even taking back the jeans, or having in a leasing concept the ability to recuperate it, offering also to get a new one when you give the old one back, then they rework the old one. And Brazil, we have Movin. Movin is again also a fashion company, but with a wider range of different designs, not so specialized like Better World Fashion with the leather jackets or mud jeans with the jeans. And just to give you a few, first flashlights on what it is that we see in these cases, or what we find in these cases regarding how they think about open loops and closed loops. Here is an example of Preserve. So just to highlight Preserve here in the middle example, that they created an open loop inward flow from this ocean plastic. And this is their initiative, the Preserve Ocean Plastic Initiative. And regarding their kind of mission and attitude, it's I think this is really something to underline. We know that one razor or one toothbrush doesn't solve the enormous problem of ocean plastic, but little steps count. So I think that's also illustrative of the attitude that all our cases have, is that even if they, of course, have a limited scope, they really strive to lead by example and also to actually spread good practices in their own, but also beyond their supply chain and industry. Then another flashlight here from Mud Jeans. So here on the right, the goodbye to ownership, hello to freedom. This refers to the leasing concept. So actually bringing in the idea that the resources remain, so to say, in their grip is maybe too strong, but they have the ability to recuperate them. And on the other hand, the customers always have a good looking pair of jeans. And they describe this here on the left, that through the lease concept, our customers can borrow our material in the shape of jeans and return it once they are done using it. So just to highlight this first aspect here, that they really try also to change the way that the customers look at how they use the product. So actually seeing the lease as a very positive thing instead of as something detrimental. And also from Mud Jeans, because we will see in the findings that we talk a lot about spillover effects and positive implications for building a supply market, a demand market. Also in the demand side, really changing customer attitudes over time. And here, it's, I think, a very illustrative example that you see they even address from, if you look to the right, from elementary school. So they offer a supply chain game for elementary schools to make children already aware of the implications of sustainable supply chains, and bringing in the idea that you can use old jeans to create new jeans. Going over the age group here, sustainable fashion course for university students, and circular Q&A from high school plus, so really flexible, that they offer these sessions as well to a very, very broad range of audiences. So beyond just their direct interest, of course, it is also part of these examples, but also really trying to bring in the idea of circularity early on. Now, the example of Better World Fashion, and here I hope there is a kind of déjà vu with the initial framework I presented. We mapped all these different cases according to this differentiation of the material flows and the support flows. And on the right, again, we have the closed loop view. We have Better World Fashion here as the focal firm. And what we now introduce here are these dotted and dashed lines. So the dotted being information flows. So they really invest a lot in supplier training, also work only with a limited scope of manufacturing partners. Then they have on the other side, if you look down, the product life stories that are channeled via the Better World Fashion app. And in terms of information flows, this is really a very critical aspect to their success in motivating customers to take part in this whole idea of reversing the flow, the material flows as a subsequent step. As the customers get motivated to see there is a previous life of my product, it gets a kind of, the jacket gets a kind of identity. It has been with two previous owners, for example, and it has been around for such and such time. And so it actually gets a much, a very strong product differentiation by being older. It's not a discount so that it's old, but it's actually something that gives it a vintage or a positive character that the customers can then see in the app. And the dashed line here, this is the supporting financial flows, so providing incentives for the reverse flows, and also the leasing and resale program as a fundamental point that motivates customers then to actually return the materials. And if we look at the open loop flows here on the left, we show it here for the three main materials that they use in their leather jackets as their main line of business. You can see the second-hand clothing exporter gets it from consumers, but outside of the supply chain. Then in the middle, the recycled textile suppliers for the jacket lining, again from consumers outside the supply chain, and the recycled metal suppliers for zippers and the like. And this is both consumers and post-industrial sources that are being targeted. So with this example, is just to highlight there's of course more than the paper and more details also on the cases. I just want to highlight this kind of idea that the support flows of the financial and information flows are really critical to make this overall supply chain work. Now, in looking at the findings, again, this is the ingoing picture. And if we now add the findings to it, this is the kind of abstract view, and I'm going to show more details in the next slides, is that this is what we knew. So we have the material flows, and they basically the known material flows turned gray in this picture. But what we are adding with also the propositions I'm going to show briefly now is that we add that the blue here, the information flows. So both in the closed loop and in the open loop designs, as well as the supporting financial flows here in green, also from environmental nonprofits and impact investors as rather untypical or non-traditional stakeholders really play an important role. And that there are, and this is this yellow color here, also some positive spillovers that are being created by the financial and information flows. This is more detailed in this picture, which is one-on-one from the paper, from the published version, where we have mapped the actual propositions. And then also you can see now why we have two lines with spillovers coming from here, because one is related to the first and one is related to P3A, which we come to now. So this is how we summarized all the aggregated results from our analysis of the cases. And what we found is the following. If we look at the outward information flows, and I try to highlight it here on the right so that it's easier to follow which propositions are being shown on the slide. We see that in the open loop designs, this supplier targeted outward information flows, they are really important for the creation of a viable supply market for the circular economy. And in closed loop designs, these customer targeted outward flows, so here at the bottom, they support the creation of a viable demand market for the circular economy. Whereas if we look at the inward information flows in the supply chain, in the open loop designs, we see that particularly R&D partners bring in knowledge for circular economy product design, also then creating a viable supply market. And in the closed loop designs, we see that the inward information flows from the customers help to better understand the market, and that the customer engagement and product returns and together with that create a viable demand market for the circular economy. So this is our first set, and the second set is in this. So again, going to the financial flows, that in the open loop designs, the outward financial flows towards the suppliers help them to invest into environmental initiatives. Therefore, again, helping that there's a viable supply market for resources and or secondary resources. And in closed loop designs, the outward financial flows towards customers help to incentivize them to promote the return of the products and again, help developing a demand market and a continuous supply of returned products. So both helping that the market grows, so demand side, but on the other, when there's a viable business also for the future, but at the same time, really facilitating this material recovery. And finally, a more general one regarding the financial flows, as our P4 said, for both the open loops and closed loop designs, the inward and outward financial flows from and to non-supply chain related parties help to build a community for the circular economy transition. Because this is what we found in very pronounced in the cases, that they have a very broad understanding of whom to involve into their supply chains, either being here environmental nonprofits. That's why I showed the POPI, this ocean plastic initiative, or also others where they find that they have a cause that they want to support and impact investors for the financial flows. On the other hand, that actually help make the model viable and facilitate that their business can be initiated and then also grow in the initial phases particularly. So these are the main propositions of the research. Here in these two slides, I'm just highlighting a few more things, more in, let's say, general language, rather than having it in the formal language of the propositions. So if we look at the closed loops, so the right side of our initial figures, when we look at the information flows, this idea of storification of products, so giving them an identity, making it actually valuable that they have had maybe even more than one previous life, helped increase the consumer engagement with these closed loop products, and also at the same time provides a feedback because there's a link to the customers in order to get new insights on the next product design. And the educational initiatives, like I exemplarily showed with the schools and the universities, help the future consumers really, if in regards to the kids, think deeply about their consumption patterns, and also ultimately in the future with the intention to increase demand for circular products. In terms of financial flows, we have here a stressing of the financial incentives in order to close the loop. Or I mean, our case is really stressed that this is important. Reserve to also say that, I think we mentioned it in the paper as well, really struggled with that as well. So has tried several ways of how to do it, even giving customers like a free envelope. So already with the stamp on it, please, when your toothbrush is done, send it back to us. But their response rate was really, really low. So that was a try for incentives that didn't work, for example, and then they keep searching for new ways to incentivize. And yeah, so it's not all that it worked from the beginning, but they really saw it as a critical point to make the models work. And also leasing as being part of a central topic that came up in order to keep their resources accessible for the businesses. Then coming to the open loops as the main findings there, these R&D collaborations in terms of information flows with suppliers and other partners, that was something that stood out. Like I mentioned, the Sogoflex material of the toy, so pet toy producer. That's just one example, being really important as a kind of information flow collaboration. Supplier training and support of using recycled materials to help even developing the industry far beyond one's own needs is also something that came up in the open loops area. And the B Corps also really trying to connect their suppliers to new buyers, just out of, let's say, the intention to make the ecosystem grow. We, for example, had this with Preserve that they mentioned that that they even connected like a potential competitor with their recycled materials supplier because they just want that more recycled materials are being used. So very yeah, very open-minded. Regarding the financial flows, here we have mentioned the impact funders. We have the impact funders again underlined as like one example, the closed loop partners who help then to demonstrate financial viability of recycled products. So actually, again, not saying that this is something like second rate, but actually really giving it a very, very positive image. And then also the redirection of profits to like-minded organizations so that the companies tried then from the from their profits to actually divert part of it to causes that they found even beyond, again, their own supply chain and direct interests worth, worth supporting. Now, the key takeaways, we try to summarize this here in a very, let's say, aggregated way. And I have the figure from the paper on the next slide. But first, the aggregated view that on the one side, we have supply chain level outcomes that these designs have been pursuing. So it's the reduction of demand for raw materials, it's extension of product use phases, so rather classical aspects. But if we look at what they have as more, ecosystem or circular ecosystem outcomes that they pursue, it is very much about this supply market development and demand market development, also advance the model viability in general so that others may actually copy the model elsewhere, and expanding their impact as far as they can. This is actually how it looks in the paper. I used the color code to illustrate this a little bit. So the supply chain specific outcomes in the open loop supply chains and closed loop supply chains. This is here the orange part, and you can see here that we linked this to the information flows and the financial flows that were particularly relevant to this. So the open loop and the respective closed loop, and the broader system ecosystem outcomes here are highlighted in purple. So this is what we have put here on the right to really emphasize that, this is the resulting models, the flows, the support flows, they work as enablers in order to get to these intermediate outcomes on supply chain and broader ecosystem level, but with the ultimate goal of creating societal impact and pursuing a bottom-up transition to the circular economy. Now, coming to the towards the end, the contributions of this paper. So we see that one thing that this paper really intended to do was to bridge the sustainable supply chain design literature with the circular economy literature and moving beyond the material focus. So introducing what has been already known from the sustainable supply chain design, that support flows are important for sustainability, bringing it into the circular economy literature. Also, there was in 2018 this nice paper by Batista et al., who actually argued that as future research needs, an in-depth discussion of the configurational challenges of circular supply chains and the network of actors engaged in different restorative business models would be an interesting or important area of further research. And with this paper, we think we have made a start to address the configurational aspect, because we're looking at the designs of the material information and financial flows. And also with these non-traditional actors involved, we also see that there are some insights on this network of actors engaged. And this also relates to the next point, is that we highlight this role of stakeholders as NGOs, impact investors, industry associations, and digital platforms. And finally, we see that the paper demonstrates that circularity leaders work to enrich the whole circular economy ecosystem, not just their own supply chain. So really with this kind of broader intent that we just saw with this, here purple outcomes that they pursue. Having said that, I thank you very much for your attention. Of course, I'm now here for the Q&A. If you want to get in touch later, I've put our contact details here. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge that this research was partially funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, so DFG, the German Research Foundation, and we kindly thank the DFG for its support. And with that, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for such an interesting talk, Lydia. One of the great benefits of seeing these webinars or hosting these webinars is being able to see all these other interesting research areas which all sort of tie into the puzzle somewhere along the way. So that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. So the Q&A is open now for anyone who would like to ask their questions. Just give people the chance in case they're thinking of them. I actually had a few questions of my own that I thought I might start with. Um, so Lydia, I just wondered, you talked a little bit about supply chain management and circular economy as being separate research areas. And I sort of wondered how the supply chain management aspect can tie into the circular economy or sustainability research areas. Where do you see the best opportunities in supply chain management for changes for sustainability? And how can these sorts of research areas help each other in terms of achieving our global goals?
Mhm. Thanks a lot for the question. So, in terms of supply chain and operations, which is, of course, my, let's say, home domain, what I'm currently seeing is that for a number of years, the topic of restorative or even regenerative supply chains has been coming up quite a lot. So, this is currently also, I would say, the current ideal standard of what should be done. So, not having the supply chains try to be damage minimizing, but ideally even having positive effects. So in environmental terms and or social terms. So in our area, also the social dimension is actually as part of the overall sustainability definition with the triple bottom line, also part of the consideration. If I look at let's say in the other part of the coin, I think there's a lot to learn from the industrial symbiosis literature and what is happening there, which is oftentimes, if I may say so, modeling also of the material flows with a very strong focus, of course, looking at how this can be done. So I think maybe there is a bit of an opportunity to also integrate some social aspects potentially, as it's oftentimes more energy, material, CO2 emissions, yeah, focused and not so much necessarily the social side. And on the other side, I think that the OSCM domain really should, keep close touch with that literature to not reinvent a lot, which has been already found, especially regarding industrial symbiosis, because it's just as it sometimes is with different terminology. Yeah, we talked a lot, back to the OCM about networks, about even more lately about systems, but this has all been there for quite a number of decades. And yeah, to bridge these two, I'm sure there's a lot of potential.
It's interesting how even today, where research is so accessible, it is so easy to not realize what existing research there is. We haven't because obviously prior to the internet and everything, it was not uncommon for scientific discoveries to be made by different people at the same time and published separately. But I feel like in some ways we haven't necessarily come that far from that, have we?
Good point.
So my other question, well, I have a few questions, but I was interested in, from a supply chain perspective, the differences between a circular and linear economy style supply chain. Like, where do the key differences lie for people that know nothing about supply chain management?
Yeah, that's also actually a topic close to my heart if we come to teaching, because if you are it's still today, so thinking about, that we actually think have come far. Even today, most textbooks for supply chain management still have a linear supply chain as the main depiction that the students learn as the supply chain in their very first contact with the topic. So taking that as the initial point that you have basically the classical supplier tiers, then you have the producer, the OEM, and then you have the customers. Um, what is being taught is that you have the material flows mainly, and that goes from left to right. So, so it's from start, and then you have basically, the waste stream in the end, and then there's a kind of footnote saying, yeah, well, there's a little bit waste is coming back, but this is unfortunately still the main message that is often being sent to students. Of course, depends on who's doing the courses and how much effort you put, but for myself, as you ask this question, I would also always put the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, like the butterfly diagram with the technical flows, the biological flows, also introduce the cradle to cradle approach to students even in their first course on the topic, because then at least they are aware we are not yet there in practice, but this is the vision. And then also, of course, show some examples and examples, this, which is always quite interesting, in my experience, come a lot of times from the Netherlands. So yeah, of course, they have been implementing cradle to cradle for a long time. In another research project, actually, which was also published in Resource Conservation and Recycling in 2019. We had a biomimetic perspective and looked at Dutch firms, and there it was actually that some of them already started doing this in the 90s. And
Wow.
similar, yes, yeah, very, very, very early. And they have a very a can-do attitude to this. So bridging to our today's topic, creating a supply market is something that they have done if nobody else did it. I don't know if I should share this example, but it's also in the journal here at this occasion. But I mean, it's a fantastic example for anyone interested in this topic area, which is interface. So interface is like Deso or Tarkett, who are more well known for flooring, which is recovered and then being transferred again to new flooring, is a company also doing this in cradle to cradle since the 90s. And they actually asked their suppliers, that's what I told us in this project, can you build a depolymerization plant for our products when we return them, so we can make monomers, so we can make new polymers, really like virgin material based, perfect quality. Will you do this for us? And all the suppliers said, no, you're the only one asking. And what they did is they built it themselves. And in the paper, we argue it's that they take on not only the role of the producer, like in a natural ecosystem, but also take on the role of a scavenger and decomposer, because nobody else is filling these roles from an ecosystem point of view. And what they did is they then built the plant, and they recognized their own waste stream is not big enough to run it efficiently. And again, they had an idea, and what they do is they pay African fishers to fish ghost nets out of the sea. So they get the nylon of the fishing nets, and it gets to the depolymerization plant, and then they have the material to recreate the product. So just to give an example of, yeah, maybe the bottom line is still oftentimes have these linear views. Getting to the circular view as the vision that becomes the new norm, hopefully.
This is crazy. So this kind of also leads into my next question in a way, because I was sort of wondering, I mean, you've obviously had intimate contact with sort of model examples of circular companies. And I was interested, there is, I think, this perception that to do things in a circular way is complicated and expensive,
Mm.
and it sounds like there are certainly challenges, as you've just highlighted in this example, where you say there isn't the market demand for something like this, no one's willing to help. And I was just wondering, maybe you had some insight from based on your knowledge of these companies, and also from a supply chain management perspective of the sort of obviously a lot of these companies are startups, and we all know that
Mhm.
running a startup is anyway risky and difficult to achieve. So maybe some information about how viable this kind of thing is, and is the so I think there is some degree of interest from consumers. Consumers are, I mean, admittedly, the research shows that consumers aren't really generally willing to pay more for sustainable
Mhm.
products. They're only really willing to pay the same amount. But maybe you have some information just talking about how companies overcome these challenges. Obviously, there are these challenges, and how challenging this is from your perspective compared to a linear approach. Because obviously, I mean, it seems like it's much harder, right? But companies can do it, as the example that you've just given. So maybe you have some perspective.
Yeah, certainly, I absolutely share the impression, also based on these cases, both here in this project with the B Corps and also in the previous one, was mentioning that on the consumer side, it is difficult. In the case of the Dutch companies, the point is that most of them were B2B companies. So that obviously seems to help to some degree, because then they have to convince like one big client, of course, like another firm, but then they have quite huge part of their portfolio covered, so to say, and somebody convinced of taking their products. So that's one part, and the other side, and that's also what they emphasized, is the resource scarcity. I mean, current and increasing. That this is amplifying the risk, so risk de-risking, so to say, aspect of the whole idea, making it more attractive from a producer point of view to engage in these practices. Because even though you might not be able to have a premium from the consumer necessarily, at least not short term, you are basically able to reduce your own supply risks, and that also has a value. And that might help to convince, yeah, or to make the business case, so to say, viable. And yeah, what they all do is they try to find like-minded organizations, both in that Dutch project, I will call it like this now, and also in the B Corp project. B Corp, of course, the B Lab works as a kind of also community hub for these companies, trying to help them engage with each other. So in that sense, also helping them to overcome some of the challenges. But in the Dutch example, I should also mention that one of the central aspects there was one company like a spider in the web, FP Basic, which is not only offering the reverse material flows, so as a logistics provider, but also a blockchain based. So that was very innovative in 2019, blockchain based material passport. And this kind of information, that's why, again, it's back to the information flows, why it was also stressed there, that having this kind of information, where the material is, what kind of quality grade it has, actually makes it, and that was not only, it makes it less risky because it's closer. So geographically, now, just right now, a huge topic with all the tariffs issues going on, that you have planability because the resources are basically already in, even potentially in your domestic surroundings. But also they emphasized that it is a misconception that that companies often think a material, if it is virgin material, is better than a secondary material. If the material passport gives you the full information, this material, the secondary, has already had all the quality checks. It has been processed once. So actually it is more reliable than, that's what they said, the primary material coming from a different part of the mine. So it that might be very different actually from what you had earlier. Whereas this material is, you know it basically, and you can use it again and again.
Isn't that interesting? It's sort of the same as, you would expect that flying is exceptionally dangerous, but because it's so highly regulated, it's safer than driving, It's the same sort of thing, right? When you've
Yes,
got
that's right.
so much more focus on the stream, the secondary stream, then actually it becomes more reliable. Quite interesting. Um, I also wondered, so a lot of sort of, I would say, prominent figures in circular economy are talking about the necessity of scaling. So, a lot of the problems, a lot of the lack of progress that's being seen is in circular economy has to do with things being very incremental and compartmentalized and isolated pilot scale things, when essentially the whole concept of circular economy is based on a widespread implementation. I was sort of wondering if you had some insights on this from a supply chain management perspective, because obviously supply chains in any kind of circular transition, supply chains are going to be critical. And I was just wondering whether you had any insights that relate to scaling.
Hmm. Well, Um, before you directed your question to my supply chain, let's say, yeah, when I put this hat on, actually, the hat I was just raising to put on is my social entrepreneurship hat, because actually, also working, and I come back to the SCM in a second.
Please,
In
is everything you want to share.
Okay, thank you. Is that actually also in this whole project, because in total we had 12 cases that we collected over time, and we analyzed them also for different aspects. And the in one go, we actually looked at the scaling topic, particularly trying to emphasize that it is very much also about impact scaling that they seek. And we identified different modes of impact scaling. But this actually also published, but in the Journal of Social Entrepreneurship. Yeah, so I'm 100% with you with the thought of scaling. And there it is very much about, it's also that not necessarily they themselves would then scale, but it's also can be that they export, so to say, their business model, or they make others copy their business model because they care about the impact. And so they don't try to maximize only the profit by, like doing a franchise or something like this, but they really are rather interested in that this happens somewhere else as well in a similar way. So much for the social entrepreneurship. Now, regarding the SEM view, yes, it, of course, one of the reasons why in this project, in the other I was mentioning, and also even before that in the sustainable, in the social, no, the social businesses, sustainable supply chain design, we have been looking at unisocial businesses, or businesses founded by or funded by unisocial business. The reason why we have been looking at these small scale operations in general is that they are not in the kind of trap that many large traditional firms are, that they were founded for economic success, they were optimized for efficiency, and then they have to somehow add social and environmental criteria on top of it. But instead, these companies, because they are founded with a mission that is either environmentally and or socially oriented while being financially viable, so it's always, at least in our project, has been an ongoing topic that they have to be financially viable. um, then the question was always, how do they design their supply chains, even if it is just on small scale at that moment in time, to see what are they doing differently. And a recurring theme, like also was our topic today, has been that they have a much broader perspective on stakeholders, so who to involve. And so the information and financial flows to and from these different stakeholders, being it information or financially oriented, plays a critical role in their models. And yeah, regarding scaling apart from that, of course, they try to grow, or they grow, but it's not their primary primary objective. If they are, it's again then the topic of now again back to social entrepreneurship of mission drift. So they are keen on trying to avoid that scaling for the purpose of economic gain goes to the detriment of the environmental and or social um, impacts they want to achieve. So scaling is done carefully. Let's put it like this, at least in the cases that I've seen over the years in these projects.
So interesting, Lydia. This is, like I say, this is my favorite thing about doing these, is the chance to talk to such interesting people about their topics and learn something new myself. Well, I mean, I have actually still a lot more questions written here, but we're essentially out of time. And I think maybe we don't have questions from the audience today, although I'm sure that they enjoyed the webinar very much. Perhaps you'd like to just share your screen once more, if in case anyone wants to jot down your email address in case they have
Sure,
anything they'd like to discuss with you at a later point.
of course.
So we have that there, lydia.bals@hs-mainz.de. So if you have any questions, I'm sure that Lydia will be more than happy to answer them.
I am.
So thank you so much, Lydia. I'm going to now share, if you could just stop sharing your screen for a
Sure,
moment.
of course.
And now I'm going to just bring up the closing notes. So as I say, again, a big thank you so much to Lydia. I I really enjoyed those questions. This is not my area, and I really felt like I maybe learned something new. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation again.
And my pleasure. So the next webinar will be from Tamar Makov from Ben Gurion University in Israel. And she's going to be speaking with us on the topic of the convenience economy, product flows, and greenhouse gas emissions of returned apparel. So another clothing related. Well, I mean, some of the examples that Lydia covered today were clothing related. That's on Thursday, May 22nd, 2025. I also just saw a little reaction there, some clapping hands for Lydia. Thank you again, Lydia. Okay, so yes, that's all from us for today. Be sure to join us on May 22nd for that webinar. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. And a big thank you again to Lydia so much for her presentation.
Thanks.
So have a great day to everybody, or a good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And